throughout the course, there will be a lot of videos where I provide the report that we are working on as a resource in the lecture. So this is just something that you can use optionally. Of course, you can also just work along in your own file. This is the more common scenario, but in some cases you might want to use my file. For example, you have some issues, you want to just jump into a specific day, and you want to have this report that I'm working on in the video also, so that you can start immediately from there. Maybe you didn't follow along the previous videos. You can do this very easily. So you can download the file, then you can open this file. For example, I've already opened basic cleaning. This is the file that we have been working on in the previous lecture. This opens like there is no problem at all. We can see the data on the right side. But we can also, when we open the query editor, see that there's some error message. And this error message says, could not find part of the path, and then this path. And this is basically pointing to the data file that we have loaded into this project file. And here we see this is the path that is from my local machine, because when I have created this file, it is of course pointing to a file on my local machine. So therefore, this path, this is the path that has been used, is not findable on your machine, because this path is on my machine and this has been created on my machine. So therefore, it's not avoidable to have this error, but we can solve it very easily. And this is actually also something that can happen in many cases, and therefore it's also in general very important to understand this and know how you can solve it. So again, the mistake comes from the fact that this file cannot be found on your local machine. So maybe the path has been changed or the file is not there anymore, and we can solve it by, let's first close the query editor. Actually, we could also solve it by using the source in here. There we can also reconfigure the path. So it's the same way, but we can usually do this right away from here in the report view. So we go to transform data, to this text, and then we see that there is below transform data also the data source settings. So when we click on this, we have this little window where we can see now all of the data sources we have loaded, also the paths to them. And for example, here we see this is our file. So here we need to go to change source. And then we can see this window again. So in here, we just need to change the file path. So we could just enter the path. For example, I could go in here, copy this new path because I know this is exactly in here. I copy it, and then I will just paste it actually just before the sales, because this needs to be there as well. So I will enter also a backslash, and then I can click on OK. Of course, I could also just manually browse the path and the folders to just select the file right away. For example, I go to browse, I go to the location where this file is available, I select it, and I click on open. And then I click on OK, and now I can just close the data source settings as well. And now we see that if we go to transform data, that now this mistake should not be available anymore, and we see that this has been solved. So now again, we can go to close and apply, and this will now apply those changes that we have just made, because changing the data source settings is also some data transformation basically, so we need to apply those changes. We can do this, for example, by just going to the query editor and then clicking close and apply. So this is just something important to understand when you are working with those attached project files. And also in general, if you see this error message, you now know how you can solve it. And in the next lecture, if we have a look at the query editor, we see there are still many issues, and we want to tackle them so that we can find out what is the total revenue. So to do this, we first need to fix some of the data problems in here, like all of these missing rows, the NA values, and so on. So let's now have a look at how we can edit columns and rows, because in our scenario we see that there are actually a lot of problems. For example, we have some blank rows. We need to filter those out. We have some NA values that also shouldn't be there. And also we have even a whole column that is also not available. So when we talk about editing rows, we see that we can also filter and remove some rows. This is mainly what we mean when we talk about editing rows. So in our case, the first issue that we see is that we have some blank rows. They are completely blank and therefore we shouldn't have them included in our data. To filter those blank rows, we have one tool available under the home ribbon. This is remove rows. So if we click on it, we see we have the step remove blank rows. We click on it, we see there will be one additional applied step, and all of those blank rows have been completely removed. So this is great. But now if we scroll a little bit down, we see that in this row, we have also kind of a blank row, but this has not been removed because in one column, this is the order ID, there was a value, and therefore this was not identified as a blank row and it hasn't been removed. Therefore, we also want to remove this, but now we need to apply a filter on a specific column. So for example, the product ID. And like this, we can also filter the rows. So here I could now just go on this little icon, and this will now allow me to filter this column, and with this filter all of the rows. So for example, I can say when there is a blank value in this selected column, this row should be entirely removed. The same thing I can also do for the value NA. And then this will also filter out all of the rows where in this column there is an NA value. So if I click here on OK, I see this has now also been removed. So this is now really great. And now I can even jump back and forth between those steps because maybe I want to see what rows have been exactly removed. So I see in the removed blank row step, in the previous step, these rows were still available. And then in the next step, those have been removed. So now it already looks much better. But now we need to be aware that there can be also some duplicates in the data. So for example, we see that those are actually duplicates. So these 3 rows are actually duplicates. They are the same across all of the columns. So if we have some duplicates in our data set, we can also remove them. Again, by using remove rows. Here we have the step remove duplicates. So if we select it, this has been identified as a duplicate and therefore it has been removed. But we need to be aware that for this step, let me quickly remove it again, we cannot have a column selected. For example, if I go to the sales and you see that there are actually in this individual column many duplicates. So many have, for example, the value 0 sales. If I have this column selected and then I apply the step remove duplicates, it will work differently because then it will remove all of the duplicates for this column. So now there will be no value that is actually a duplicate. So for example, 0 sales previously has been available many times, but now there's only one. And this is now also visible in the order ID. All of the orders are basically gone that we didn't want to remove. So therefore, let's just remove this step again and just be aware that when we apply this step, remove duplicates, we shouldn't have a column usually selected unless we want to really filter all of the duplicates in a specific column. So I have no column selected and I now go again to remove duplicates. So now that we have fixed these issues in the rows, we also now want to see that in this case there's also a column that is not really useful. So there's nothing in this column. And we also want to remove this column. We can do this by just selecting it and then we have this option remove columns. We can just click on it and it will be removed. Let me remove this step again, so the column is there again. And then we see in the lower part, we also have some option like remove all of the other columns. So if I would do this, I remain only with this individual column. Sometimes this can be also useful. I will remove it again. And lastly, I have also something next to it, which is called choose columns. So for example, if we have only a few columns and we want to delete a lot of columns, this is a useful option. So let me go to choose columns. And in here, I see now the list of all of the columns. Let's say you have 20, 30, 40 columns and you want to just quickly remove some specific columns. Then you can just go to choose columns, uncheck the column and click on OK. And like this, you can even go later back to this step. You click on the gear icon and then you can even adjust this step. So for example, I could bring it back again or remove some other columns. In our case, we only want to uncheck column 3. So this is now a lot better. We have fixed already a lot of issues. And therefore, we now want to focus on the revenue, because our goal is that we want to see the total amount of revenue. And therefore, in the next lecture, we see what issue we run into when we are now trying to do this, and what things we need to still transform and adjust to be able to see this total revenue.
For watching the video till the end, please leave your thoughts below so we can discuss more about the topic. If you'd like to suggest a video that could help the community, feel free to message me on X or Instagram. We also share short videos on Instagram, so make sure to follow us there. Feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you, and might even create a video based on your suggestion. Thanks again for being part of our community. See you in the next video.